You know, I kind of feel like I need some kind of intro video with music. Nothing crazy. Yeah. 10, 15 seconds long. Something like that. Maybe a little cartoon character comes out and does something crazy. Yeah, it always feels so weird when the screen just opens up and there's my face. And now I'm talking. And now we're doing a show. You know, there's no lead up. There's no build up. But I guess that's life, right? You don't get a lead up or a build up. Most of the time, we're just kind of thrust into things without being asked if we're ready for it. We get thrust into things without, being asked, are you prepared? Do you have everything that you need? Fortunately, we do have the opportunity for a lot of things to have some things ready. And a lot of times we do that based off of our perspectives. So here's an example. Right in front of me, I have some notes. They're not super complicated, but they're talking points, like bullets, headlines, ideas, things that I want to remember to expunge upon. This allows me to be a little bit more prepared for something that is otherwise completely impromptu and unprepared. I definitely do try to make it a point, though, to not write out scripts for shows, especially things like this. And it isn't that I don't think they're helpful. It isn't anything more than I like to riff, I like to explore the thoughts as they manifest. I like to share with you the thought processes as I go through it. So that really does kind of bring us to what we're going to be talking about today, which is perspectives. Perspective is how you view, how you react, and just how you exist within the world. What you see, what you experience, what you feel. And there is no such thing as an incorrect perspective. So the other thing that I want to take note of that's kind of throwing me off a little bit, you guys may notice the camera angles different today. A person very, very near and dear to me recommended that maybe having my camera in its normal setup position for when I teach classes is a little off-putting, because you just have this little tiny guy sitting at a downward angle, and half the time, I'm forgetting that I have to be looking up at that camera to make it look like I'm actually having a conversation and speaking with you guys. But I digress. I like the change. I think it was a good idea. I think it was a good change. So let's move on to perspectives. So right now, there's a whole lot going on in the world. There's a lot of change, a lot of rapid development, a lot of tensions, a lot of emotions, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. There is a lot that is happening. Now, with keeping that in mind, a lot of what's happened is a very rapid and a very big, I wish I could think of a better word to use for there. Basically, a lot has changed in a very short period of time. How we conduct our day-to-day lives and everything that is the essence of who we are and what we do has been pulled out from underneath us and just kind of been shaken out. And now all these pieces are just falling into place, and they're not where we put them. They're not how we set everything up. You see this in the social distancing. You see this in a lot of industries being shut down. We hadn't been able to dine in at restaurants. Movie theaters were a no-go. Places where people typically gather or congregate, that was a no-no. We used to go to a trivia night every Thursday at a restaurant, and that was suddenly something we weren't able to do anymore. So with all of this dramatic change that happened, we had to adjust, we had to do things differently, we had to kind of reorganize and reprioritize our cues and what we do. Now, I don't want to get too much into, what is happening, what has happened, what we can do. I really want to talk about the perspective of change and why we're seeing, sensing, and feeling so much of the anxiety, stress, fear, animosity that is essentially palpable in our society right now. So I love using the gym as my anecdote anytime I try to make a comparison that I want people to understand. So think to a time where you decided, all right, I'm gonna undertake a healthier lifestyle. I'm gonna start to change and modify my food intake. Maybe I'm gonna do meal prepping. Maybe I'm going to start going to the gym 2-3 times a week and doing an exercise regimen, a fitness regimen. Maybe I'm going to get myself a trainer. Well, if you've ever considered, done, pondered, or pursued any of those ventures, what you will have found is that as soon as you start, there's a little bit of an anxiety that happens, and it's very easy to almost push it to the side and forget kind of what's going on. And what it is you're radically changing what your day-to-day is. You're adding something into the routine, But that's just one thing. You're starting to meal prep. Okay, that's one thing. That's stressful. That's change. You're going to respond to it with anxiety, fear, stress. But you're going to do it. You're going to be able to get through it because you chose to do this. You go to the gym. All right, well, that's a change too. You're not normally going to the gym. It isn't something that you set aside an hour for within your normal schedule. So yeah, now that's going to also produce a little bit of an anxious response, a little bit of fear. But what ends up happening is two things. We made these choices ourselves. They were given to us by ourselves. They weren't forced upon us. Nobody told us we had to do it. And we were able to practice. We were able to do it again and again and again and again. And somewhere down the line, it just kind of became part of routine and habit. So let's use another anecdote. Let's look at one of the greatest modern American tragedies. When 9/11 happened, a lot of things changed very suddenly, very rapidly. With air travel, regulations as far as banking, identification, and lots of other things, that you don't really necessarily think about unless you work in those fields or those sectors. But a lot changed very rapidly, and it was thrust upon us, right? So think of the very first time that you tried to fly post 9/11. It was a very different experience. There were much longer lines. The security checkpoints seemed a lot more tedious. You had to take off your belts. You had to take off your shoes. You had to do X, Y, Z. You couldn't bring liquids in certain size containers on board the plane. Just all of a sudden, a lot of things. And rightfully so, it's made a lot of people anxious. It's made a lot of people uncomfortable because this was change that was just kind of thrust upon us without our input. But over time, we've gotten used to it. We've gotten accustomed to it, and now we plan for it, right? So if you're going to be flying, chances are you're probably going to give yourself that extra hour or hour and a half, right? Good morning, Dottie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Is it getting kind of choppy for you guys? I feel like my connection was getting a little choppy there. I keep seeing myself pause and whatnot on the screen. 1 second, I just want to check the stream health, see what's going on here. Yeah, look at that. Got a little bit of a spike in video. Ooh. All right. No, I don't think that's going to affect us too much. All right. Whoop. And the thought train just got derailed. That's unfortunate. Hopefully some of the passengers survived. Flying. So yeah, everything changed, and now we plan, right? We make sure that we have time to allow for all these extra things that we have to go through. And with that being said, it tends to not be as stressful, right? We've gotten more accustomed to it. We've allowed the leeway to, let these things happen, and now it's not as stressful. It's not as anxiety producing. But again, it was a choice that we weren't given any input on. So now let's think about. I have a unique perspective into some of these things just because my lovely fiance works in banking. So a lot of things changed on the regulation aspect with what was going on with all that, and a lot of people don't realize that, especially in small business ownership and things like that. So when they try to do XYZ at the bank that involves funds and money and things like that, there's a whole bunch of hoops that they have to jump through that they didn't have to jump through before. And they have to jump through those hoops because the bank has to jump through those hoops. Whoa, pardon me. No? Number two coming? I guess it's just a one sneeze kind of day today. But in a similar fashion, they weren't asked, they weren't inquired about those changes. It's just, here you go, deal with it. And that causes stress, that causes anxiety. Anytime you upend the routine, anytime you change something in your day-to-day, the natural human response to it is stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety are not inherently bad things. Too much of them, too often, that's what starts to become bad. Again, let's kind of jump back to our gym anecdote. When you're working out, when you're doing strength exercise, cardiovascular training, any kind of modality that is going to produce sweat, fatigue, you're building up stress hormone in your body. That's literally what you're doing, and your body adapts to that stress. So the stress is what drives the adaptation. It drives the muscular growth. It drives the enhancement of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. So stress, anxiety, is very human. It drives a lot of what we do. But again, when you're exposed to a very large chunk of it without any say, it can be a lot more difficult to manage. It can be a lot more difficult to deal with and recover from, even. Like, when you're put into a very traumatic scenario or situation, like say a car accident, it takes the body a long time to recover from something like that. Not just from physical injury, but the stress and anxiety, the stress hormone within the body is still very, very high. You can think about trauma in the same way. It isn't just something that you get over instantly. It takes a long time to be able to deal with those things. So let's kind of tie that all in with what's going on now. Suddenly, almost overnight, everything changed. Everything you do in your routine changed. The natural response to that is stress and anxiety. And you have to imagine that what you're feeling as far as that's concerned in stress and anxiety land, that's a pretty similar situation to what every single human being is going through. Everybody. So as stressed, as upset, as messed up as everything feels for you, that's all of us. That's every single person right now. Now, there is a subset of us that was definitely hit a lot harder by all of this. And I'm referring to all of our youth, basically K through 12 and college students, undergrads. Now, those of us who have been out of school a long time, went to college, didn't go to college, whatever, we're in our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s. We've had more experience. We've had more changes throughout our life thrust upon us that we didn't ask for. Now, albeit a lot of these were smaller changes, life changes. Some of us may have experienced some pretty big ones. If you've ever experienced having to move unexpectedly, the death of a family member or a very close pet, just any very traumatic life experience. We've had an opportunity to have more of those happen to us. That isn't to say that a younger person hasn't had a whole lot of life happen to them in a short period of time. But what I'm saying is, statistically speaking, those of us who have been on this mortal coil for a longer period of time have been given more opportunity to experience drastic change. So with everything that happened, given how all the routines changed, it is very stressful for us still. It is very anxiety producing. But we have more coping mechanisms, or at least, we've had the opportunity to develop and learn more coping mechanisms. A third grader, their biggest concern in a normal day-to-day was whether or not they were going to get chocolate milk at lunch. And now all of a sudden, they don't get to see any of their friends. They don't get to go to a building that they spend 5 days a week in, 6 to 7 to 8 hours a day. That is a lot of their identity, their existence, and their being that has just been stripped away from them. So what we're seeing is a lot of the younger generations, not all of them, mind you, but a lot of them, there's a lot of difficulty in trying to find their new place. I have some friends who, are parents, and they're dealing with, all of this. And one of the things we're seeing is, the high school, middle school age kids who are already dealing with a whole lot of change internally, chemical makeup within their brains, hormones, puberty, all that fun stuff. They're finding that there's definitely some mental health issues that are starting to arise due to all of this, because again, this is a very traumatic experience for somebody who hasn't really known anything different. Good morning, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I really do feel awful for the younger generation, because as bad as all of this is for us, having to adjust, having to change, a lot of our day-to-day, it's morphed. It's still somewhat similar. For them, it has entirely changed. The very face of everything that was their identity no longer exists. And it may never exist exactly like that again. Only time's going to be able to tell on that one. And, unfortunately, there are enough people in our country who, how do I phrase this? There are enough people in our country who aren't concerned about what is going to happen in a couple months, let alone a few years, that it's definitely going to prolong all of this discomfort that we're experiencing. So that's all I'm going to say about that. If you ever want to have a much deeper discussion on the specifics of those things, please feel free to send me a direct message. I love to chat about those things, but I'm gonna reserve the video space more for helping a broader demographic of people rather than ranting and raving about the issues that we're facing. So we dealt with a lot of change. The youth of our nation is dealing with a whole mess of change. So it makes sense that we're stressed. We're anxious. And when a lot of people are stressed and anxious, society starts to feel that stress and that anxiety. And we can very clearly see that going on. I can tell you that here in Worcester, here in Massachusetts, There's been a lot of issues with fireworks lately. There's been fires that have been caused by people shooting them off. There have been people shooting them off at all hours of the night, every single night, for like the last month and a half. Although I have to say, the past couple nights, I think this whole week leading up to today, there really hasn't been much at all. But, you know, the police also really started cracking down on that. You know, they set up an anonymous tip line for people to call in. And never in my life have I considered myself a narc, mind you. However, my dog literally was starting to go into panic attacks as soon as the sun went down. Not because he heard anything, not because he heard thunder, not because he heard fireworks, but because he was getting so used to fireworks starting to go off as soon as the sun went down that was it. That's all it took to trigger panic and anxiety inside of him. And he's my baby. He is my child. So finally, when it got to that point, I couldn't take it anymore. The neighbor who we have repeatedly asked and then repeatedly yelled at to cut the crap just wouldn't. So myself and a lot of the others in the neighborhood, we all called the anonymous tip line, and it stopped. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if they had to deal with any fines, any issuance, or maybe, you know, the police just had a chit-chat with them, but it has stopped. Now, it's upsetting that as human beings, something like that had to come to that. We couldn't reason with this individual that what they were doing was having a negative effect on everyone else around them. And therein lies a really big problem with what we're experiencing right now. With all of this change, with all of this anxiety, with all of this stress that we're all feeling, we're starting to see more and more of this very selfish, entitled behavior that, you know, never really went away, never really didn't exist. I mean, there's a reason the rest of the developed world kind of looks down on us, because, you know, we're all about America, yeehaw, and, you know, we're the greatest, we're number one. I mean, we haven't really been the greatest in anything, statistically speaking, in a very long time, and, you know, our entire greatness was built literally on the backs of a population of whom we enslaved after we completely stole land from an indigenous people. But yes, so again, I don't want to devolve into all that, but it's one of those things where that's almost kind of the American way. Is there's a sense of entitlement, there's a sense of me, and I feel like it hasn't always been that way. Now, it's always existed, but it hasn't always been like prominent and in the front. A lot of times when we've encountered national tragedies in the past, those have been very unifying moments for the whole of the United States. Again, I mean, I used this example earlier when we talked about change in flight, but, you know, let's talk about 9/11 again. That really did unify a lot of people from all walks of life. You know, people who had great political differences, people who had, you know, much different ideologies. You know, we were all united to take care of, to clean up, and to, you know, help. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we're being faced with a very great challenge. And it seems that that spirit of unity, that spirit of helping each other out, is being very strained and tested right now. There's a lot of focus being put on the loud chatter that I really would like to believe is the minority of people who are very divisive, selfish, and centered around what is good for them, and not really thinking about what they could be doing to help other people. You know, ask not what your country can do for you. And I think that's also adding more fuel to this heightened tension, this heightened stress, this heightened anxiety that we're all feeling. And, whatever your political affiliations are, we currently have a captain at the helm who's not trying to unify us, who's not taking the time, taking the effort to bring us all together. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The rhetoric that's coming from the highest office is very divisive. And it's very divisive during a very challenging, trying, and divisive time for all of us. So, when we find the absence of leadership or the vacuum of leadership, we can't look to that anymore. We can't keep waiting for someone at the top to take care of us, to direct us, to be the voice of reason, to be the voice of change. And what ends up happening is, on top of everything else that we're dealing with, well, now we need to take a really deep look at ourselves. We need to take a really deep look at our souls. And we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing the things that we're doing? What can we do to make things better for everyone around us, for the people we care about, for people we don't care about, for American citizens, for the world? What can we be doing right now? Because I'll tell you this, if this selfish face that's being exposed, warts and all, becomes the norm, it's a very, very dark place that we're all heading. So it's up to us to be the change that we want to see. It's up to us to be responsible for ourselves. You can't be responsible for other people. You can try, but you're just going to drive yourself crazy. So the best thing we can do with all this stress, all this anxiety that we're dealing with, is we can take some perspective on it. And we can recognize that we're in control of ourselves. We can do things that are beneficial to ourselves and other people, or we can do things that are beneficial to ourselves. We have the choice right now to be selfish or to be altruistic. And the more people that choose to be altruistic, the more people that choose to look out for more than just themselves, the sooner we'll be able to return to something that's not normal, because unfortunately there's never, or fortunately, however you look at it, we're never going to go back to a normal, or what we expected or supposed as normal was before all this. But what we can go back to is we can go back to a life in which we exist harmoniously and productively and surreptitiously. Or that's it. The show's over. I don't mean this show. I mean the show. So with the perspective, what I want you to remember is that what you're feeling, everyone's feeling. And to practice empathy and sympathy as much as you can. Recognize that what you're going through is just as stressful, if not more stressful, for another person. And even if you find yourself getting into a debate or a discussion or a yelling back and forth, remind yourself that if you're trying to help someone help themselves or help them help other people, talking down to them, challenging them, is not going to get your point across, and it is not going to help. It's going to further push them back into a corner, and it is going to make them double down on everything. Now that's just human nature. When we feel cornered, when we feel challenged, we back into a corner. So with this perspective, I urge all of you to move forward with calm, with vision, and to always ask yourself, how I'm about to respond to this, the question I'm about to ask, is it furthering an end goal, or is it designed to put someone down or to make them feel inferior, which I guess technically is the same as putting somebody down, or is it designed to be divisive, or is it designed to just be argumentative? Look 3 steps ahead of where you're at, what you're doing, and what you're saying, and be cognizant of where you're moving to and where you're trying to bring the people around you. That's the only way we're all going to move forward and get out of this. We have to rely on ourselves to be the leadership we wish to see. We have to take responsibility for ourselves and what's going on around us. And we have to recognize that if we're not being part of the solution, and by solution I mean helping everyone move forward, even the people who want to drag their heels, then we are doomed. Doom and gloom. But I want to end on a positive, happy note. With all this, there is opportunity. There absolutely is. There always is. And it's that ability to take a step back. It is that ability to see the perspective, to gauge what's going on around you and figure out how you want to interact with people and what questions you want to ask and where the end goal is for all of your interactions. That's going to set you up not only to be successful in surviving what we're dealing with right now, but it's going to help you enrich yourself as a human being in general and everywhere that we move beyond this. So there's lots of great cliches that, tie all this up nicely. My favorite one being, if you want to see change in the world, you need to start with the man in the mirror, right? So guys, that's going to be our show for today on Perspective. I thank you guys for joining me on this Saturday morning to sip and take a big old gulp of life. And I want to let you guys know that while there is a lot of crazy going on, while we are feeling anxious and we are feeling like we've got all this stress in our lives, remember to hold the people who are close to you closer. And remember that fostering relationships is one of the things that really makes the human experience. We have this ability to connect on such a deep, deep level. And we need to use that more. So I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope you have an awesome week coming up. Next week, there may or may not be a show. I'm going to attempt to live stream next week's show from a beach in New Hampshire on a lake. And if I can, I will. If I can't, well, I'll see you guys the following Saturday. So, enjoy, and take care of yourselves and take care of those around you. Of course, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask now before I end the stream. Love that coffee. All right, guys. Have an awesome day.